Out of Jimmy Carter's book, because this is exactly what he just said there, is that in order for us to do better, in order for us to preserve the American people, we'll have to suffer a little. So Joe Biden again, stealing material from other people. Out of Jimmy Carter's book, because this is exactly what he just said there, is that in order for us to do better, in order for us to preserve the American people, we'll have to suffer a little. Hello and welcome to the Conservative Poet with me, Amania. Happy that you're here today. Today we are going to take a road trip back in time. We're going to look at the Jimmy Carter Ronald Reagan debate. This is the first debate that they did. I think it was like 1980. So I wanted to just showcase some of the issues that we are facing currently right now. People were facing the same setup back then. And the problems Jimmy Carter had, same thing the Joe Biden administration had. It's like literally walking back into our own setup or walking into our own setup, however you want to put it, but we're relatively in the same situation. We've got inflation, we've got a broader problem, we've got a war situation across the pond, and we've got what else? I don't know. But these are the problems they had also back then. And so we're going to take a look back and see, have we truly learned from our history? Let's go back in time with Jimmy Carter and the great Ronald Reagan. I'm really excited to do this episode because it's something I've actually been wanting to do probably since I started the channel, was to start to tap into historic things that happened and to bring you all some of that information, some of that knowledge. And I thought, what better way to do that right now, being that we're headed into a new election cycle, and I think it'd be good to look at our history and learn a little bit from it. And one thing I'm going to say that I've learned already, now I spent about a couple of hours, I watched a couple of the debates of Ronald Reagan and some of the other opponents, not just Jimmy Carter. And I also watched his inauguration, his first one. And, I'm learning a lot more about it. And so I wanted for us to take a look at this debate because I think it's really important, again, because we are really looking at a lot of the same topics that we're dealing with now. And so I wanted to just sort of maybe make a contrast of what was happening then and what's happening now. And so in the clip that, and again, this debate is an hour and 35 minutes long. So I will not do that to you in one sitting, not right now. I may put it all together in a one sitting for somebody who wants to watch the whole thing that way. But I'm gonna break it down into smaller sections. And so what we're gonna see now is a conversation about the inflation of Jimmy Carter. Now, if you know anything about his presidency, you know he had a terrible presidency, and it was inflation, inflation, inflation. And from what I just learned in this very clip, is that when he inherited the administration, inflation was at a 4% low. It was 4% low. And during this debate that they're having, which would be about 3 years later, inflation is at record high at 12. It maybe not record high, but it's high at 12. And so again, when we look at our situation now, Joe Biden received a very good economy. Aside from the COVID, we're going to sit the COVID down. Aside from the COVID, the country was doing exceptionally well. Things were really, really good for us. and we give it to Joe Biden, well, we didn't give him nothing. But that's a rabbit hole. I'm going to digress. I don't want to go down the cheating rabbit hole, right? So they took this one at low inflation rates. And I'm going to have to find the numbers to see where are we now. Biden and Carter given or taken the country low inflation, and in their presidency, up went the numbers. So let us see this debate between Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan on inflation. 1980, and today is 2023. Somebody do the math on that for me. Somebody do the math. Before we continue with the video, here is a brief word from the sponsor of our video. Merry Christmas to you. We have some great products that will make excellent gifts for the patriots in your life. You can have some fun also and get the liberals and progressives one too. This design is President Trump's mugshot from Georgia, stating Merry Christmas and Revenge 2024. This amazing design comes on t-shirts, hoodies, sweatshirts in different colors. It also is on coffee mugs. The entire store is currently on sale. The Conservative Poet at www.orlandopatriot.com. This Biden economy is hard on us all, but I thank you for supporting the channel and what I do here. Merry Christmas and God bless you.
Thank you, gentlemen. The next question is from Harry Ellis to President Carter.
Mr. President, when you were elected in 1976, the Consumer Price Index stood at 4.8%. It now stands at more than 12%. Perhaps more significantly, the nation's broader underlying inflation rate has gone up from 7 to 9%. Now, a part of that was due to external factors beyond U.S. control, notably the more than doubling of oil prices by OPEC last year. Because the United States remains vulnerable to such external shocks, can inflation, in fact, be controlled? If so, what measures would you pursue in a second term?
Again, it's important to put the situation into perspective. In 1974, we had a so-called oil shock, wherein the price of OPEC oil was raised to an extraordinary degree. We had an even worse oil shock in 1979. In 1974, we had the worst recession, the deepest and most penetrating recession since the Second World War. The recession that resulted this time was the briefest we've had since the Second World War. In addition, we've brought down inflation. Early this year, the first quarter, we did have a very severe inflation pressure brought about by the OPEC price increase. It averaged about 18% the first quarter of this year. The second quarter, we had dropped it down to about 13%. The most recent figures, the last 3 months of the third quarter of this year, the inflation rate is 7%. Still too high, but it illustrates very vividly that in addition to providing an enormous number of jobs, 9 million new jobs in the last 3.5 years, that the inflationary threat is still urgent on us. I noticed that Governor Reagan recently mentioned the Reagan-Kemp-Roth proposal, which his own running mate, George Bush, described as voodoo economics, and said that it would result in a 30% inflation rate. And Business Week, which is not a Democratic publication, said that this Reagan-Kemp-Roth proposal, and I quote them, I think, was completely irresponsible and would result in inflationary pressures which would destroy this nation. So our proposals are very sound and very carefully considered to stimulate jobs, to improve the industrial complex of this country, to create tools for American workers, and at the same time would be anti-inflationary in nature. So to add 9 million new jobs, to control inflation, and to plan for the future with the energy policy now intact as a foundation is our plan for the years ahead.
Mr. Ellis, do you have a follow-up question from Mr. Carter?
So, what I gathered from that clip of Jimmy Carter talking about OPEC and all of that, the only way I can seem to tie it together here for us is that when Joe Biden got in, he closed the Keystone pipeline, which President Trump put in for us so we can create our own oil and get our own oil here as opposed to begging Saudi Arabia and foreigners for oil, which is what Carter was been doing, and therefore prices had gone up, and so that was part of the reason for the inflation in his presidency, and it's the same problem for Joe Biden because again they closed the Keystone pipelines here, but they went begging for oil to Saudi Arabia. China, actually not China, Joe Biden actually went out there hand begging, and the Saudis did not want anything to do with him. So one of the reasons we're in this situation is because of that. And the reason Jimmy Carter was in the same situation, I don't know if he had stopped drilling here. That's something I would have to do more research on to find out. But I know that they were buying from the Saudis and foreigners. And so those prices were really high and it cost the American taxpayer a lot, which is what we've suffered through in these last 2-3 years since Joe Biden's been in. Uh, Gas prices is high, eggs, food, everything is extremely high. And so yeah, inflation, both of them, both Carter and Biden, failures because of the oil prices and us not drilling here in America, us not drilling our own oil. And what do I say? I say, drill, drill, Bill. We got oil in Texas. Drill, drill, drill. We got oil in
Mr.
Texas.
President, you have mentioned the creation of 9 million new jobs. At the same time, the unemployment rate still hangs high, as does the inflation rate. Now, I wonder, can you tell us what additional policies you would pursue in a second administration in order to try to bring down that inflation rate? And would it be an act of leadership to tell the American people they're going to have to sacrifice to adopt a leaner lifestyle for some time to come?
Yes, we have demanded that the American people sacrifice, and they've done very well. As a matter of fact, we are importing today about 1/3 less oil from overseas than we did just a year ago. We've had a 25% reduction since the first year I was in office. At the same time, as I said earlier, we have added about 9 million net new jobs in that period of time, a record never before achieved. Also, the new energy policy has been predicated on two factors. One, conservation, which requires sacrifice, and the other one, increase in production of American energy, which is going along very well. More coal this year than ever before in history. More oil and gas wells drilled this year than ever before in history. The new economic revitalization program that we have in mind, which will be implemented next year, would result in tax credits, which would let business invest in new tools and new factories to create even more new jobs, about 1 million in the next 2 years. And we also have planned a youth employment program, which would encompass 600,000 jobs for young people. This has already passed the House, now has an excellent prospect to pass the Senate.
So, what I've gathered from that is this is not the first time an administration has told the American people, you gonna have to just buckle down. You just gonna have to suffer a little. You just gonna have to suffer just a little bit so we can get through this. Well, sometime back, I'm gonna say maybe a year or so back it was, I'm not sure, I don't remember when, but the affirmative action press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre, who I haven't done in a while, by the way. It's not that I've given her up completely. I just can't stand to listen to her. So it's just real difficult to do those Karine Jean-Pierre videos. Um, but in any event, she came out here and she told the American people, yeah, it's Putin's fault that we're in this process. You're suffering because of Putin. Matter of fact, winter is coming, and I made a video saying winter is coming, Corinne Jean-Pierre. What do we do now? And in her video, she's in her briefing, she said, the American people will just have to suffer a little. You just have to just buckle down a little while we get through this. So I guess they took a page out of Jimmy Carter's page. They took a out of Jimmy Carter's book, because this is exactly what he just said there, is that in order for us to do better, in order for us to preserve the American people, we'll have to suffer a little. So Joe Biden again, stealing material from other people. Page out of Jimmy Carter's book, because this is exactly what he just said there, is that in order for us to do better, in order for us to preserve the American people, we'll have to suffer a little.
Now, the same question goes to Governor Reagan. Governor Reagan, would you like to have the question repeated?
Would you pursue?
Mr. Ellis, I think this idea that has been spawned here in our country, that inflation somehow came upon us like a plague and therefore it's uncontrollable and no one can do anything about it, is entirely spurious, and it's dangerous to say this to the people. When Mr. Carter became president, inflation was 4.8%, as you said. It had been cut in two by President Gerald Ford. It is now running at 12.7%. President Carter also has spoken of the new jobs created. Well, we always, with the normal growth in our country and increase in population, increase the number of jobs. But that can't hide the fact that there are 8 million men and women out of work in America today, and 2 million of those lost their jobs in just the last few months. Mr. Carter had also promised that he would not use unemployment as a tool to fight against inflation. And yet his 1980 economic message stated that we would reduce productivity and gross national product and increase unemployment in order to get a handle on inflation, because in January, at the beginning of the year, it was more than 18%. Since then, he has blamed to the people for inflation OPEC. He's blamed the Federal Reserve System. He has blamed the lack of productivity of the American people. He has then accused the people of living too well, and that we must share in scarcity, we must sacrifice and get used to doing with less. We don't have inflation because the people are living too well. We have inflation because the government is living too well. And the last statement, just a few days ago, was a speech to the effect that we have inflation because government revenues have not kept pace with government spending. I see my time is running out here. I'll have to get this down very fast. Yes, you can lick inflation by increasing productivity and by decreasing the cost of government to the place that we have balanced budgets and are no longer grinding out printing press money, flooding the market with it because the government is spending more than it takes in. And my economic plan calls for that. The president's economic plan calls for increasing the taxes to the point that we finally take so much money away from the people that we can balance the budget in that way. But we will have a very poor nation and a very unsound economy if we follow that path.
So if you don't know it, I love Ronald Reagan. And that answer that he just gave to the same question that they just asked Jimmy Carter is gold. He says, and he was very funny. He had such an incredible sense of humor. He says, that inflation didn't just come out of nowhere. We didn't just pull it out of the sky. Somebody caused it to happen, Take responsibility for what you've done. So you've blamed everybody. You've blamed OPEC. You've blamed the American people. You've blamed foreign countries. You've blamed everybody except for the man in the mirror. In this case, both Jimmy Carter and Biden, the men in the mirror. And of course, Biden says it's not our fault. It's Putin's fault. It's his fault because of this Russian war. That's why the gas prices is going up. That's why the economy is the way it is. Blame everybody else but the man in the mirror. So we love Reagan for that. We love him standing up and saying, you know what? Take responsibility for what you've done. We were at 4%. Now we're at 12%. It's your fault, and you need to be responsible for that. Don't blame everybody else. You deal with it. And so, again, beastly, humbling man, but yet very tough, very able and capable. And he was funny as hell. So yes, that was a great response from President Reagan.
Follow up, Mr. Ellis.
Yes, you have centered on cutting government spending in what you have just said about your own policies. You have also said that you would increase defense spending. Specifically, where would you cut government spending if you were to increase defense spending and also cut taxes so that presumably federal revenues would shrink?
Well, Most people, when they think about cutting government spending, they think in terms of eliminating necessary programs or wiping out some service that government is supposed to perform. I believe that there is enough extravagance and fat in government. As a matter of fact, one of the secretaries of HEW under Mr. Carter testified that he thought there was $7 billion worth of fraud and waste in welfare and in the medical programs associated with it. We've had the General Accounting Office estimate that there is probably tens of billions of dollars that is lost in fraud alone, and they have added that waste adds even more to that. We have a program for a gradual reduction of government spending based on these theories, and I have a task force now that has been working on where those cuts could be made. I'm confident that it can be done and that it will reduce inflation because I did it in California. And inflation went down below the national average in California when we returned money to the people and reduced government spending.
I don't know what the national debt was like when this debate happened. I mean, even back then, we were already in trouble with it. And now, all these years later, I mean, where are we? 33 trillion in debt? I think that's where we are. 33 trillion in debt. And Ronald Reagan was right on point. We have to cut government spending. Back then, they had to cut government spending. What do you think we have to do now? We have to starve it, not just cut it. We have to starve it. These people are spending trillions and trillions of dollars. They are supporting other people's wars, protecting other people's borders, other countries' borders, other countries' values, but ours is wide open. We've got millions of people walking into the country daily. All of that cost, all of that is spending, billions being spent in these liberal cities. Billions and billions and billions are being spent on the taxpayer back. And for what? For what? It makes no sense. Carter said, not Carter, President Reagan said that he did it in California. We just did the debates, DeSantis versus Gavin Newsom. My God, Ronald Reagan is probably rolling over in his grave to see what these people have done to his beloved California, to see what is happening to the cities of San Francisco, to see all the filth and everything gruesome that Newsom has done to California. I mean, he would be turning over in his grave. All this work that he did, and for what? For nothing. These people turned California into a filthy shithole. Yeah, I said it, a filthy shithole. And that's what they've done to all of these cities, New York City, Chicago, all of them, filthy shitholes. We need another iron like Reagan in office. Trump 2024.
Carter.
Governor Reagan's proposal, the Reagan-Kemp-Roth proposal, is one of the most highly inflationary ideas that ever has been presented to the American public. He would actually have to cut government spending by at least $130 billion in order to balance the budget under this ridiculous proposal. I noticed that his task force is working for his future plans, had some of their ideas revealed in the Wall Street Journal this week. One of those ideas was to repeal the minimum wage. And several times this year, Governor Reagan has said that the major cause of unemployment is the minimum wage. This is a heartless kind of approach to the working families of our country, which is typical of many Republican leaders in the past, but I think has been accentuated under Governor Reagan. In California, I'm surprised Governor Reagan brought this up, he had the three largest tax increases in the history of that state under his administration. He more than doubled state spending while he was governor, 122% increase, and had between a 20 and 30% increase in the number of employees in California. Thank you, sir.
Typical Democrat answer. Well, we can't cut funding for the government. If we cut funding for the government, how are we going to survive? How are we going to fend? How are we going to feed the people? How are we going to feed ourselves? How are we going to feed our pocketbooks, right? If we decrease government spending. And Reagan says, yeah, it can be done. We can do it. We can survive. We can live. And that's why, in this climate right now, I really truly do advocate that I'd love to see what happens if they did not pass these budgets, the ones that all of a sudden nobody hears nothing about it. A day before the thing is due, everybody's in a row. Oh my God, they're gonna shut down the government. They're gonna shut down the government. They're gonna shut down the government. We've got to pass this. We've got to pass this. We've got to pass this. And then they make it this. I'd love to see it one day. God, I hope Mike Johnson has the chops to do it. If they can't agree on lowering things or making things better for the American people, then let it shut down. Let it shut down. Let it shut down for a week or two, couple of months. See what happens. I think we'd be just fine. If the government shut down, we would be just fine.
It's Governor Reagan has the last word on this question.
Yes. The figures that the president has just used about California is a distortion of the situation there. Because while I was governor of California, our spending in California increased less per capita than the spending in Georgia while Mr. Carter was governor of Georgia in the same 4 years. The size of government increased only 1/6 in California of what it increased in proportion to population in Georgia. And the idea that my tax cut proposal is inflationary, I would like to ask the president, why is it inflationary to let the people keep more of their money and spend it the way they'd like? And it isn't inflationary to let him take that money and spend it the way he wants.
I wish that question need not be rhetorical, but it must be because we run out of time on that. Now,
So Governor Reagan posed some really good questions to Jimmy Carter, which, of course, as you saw, that they didn't let him answer. And if you could pay attention, he was looking over there, Carter, scared. Oh my God, he's absolutely right. You could like read his mind and see, why is he saying these things? He's right. I hope the American people don't get that. Um, it's a disgrace. Governor Reagan says, how about you let the American people spend their money the way they want instead of you spending the American people money the way you want? If the American people spent their money the way they want, inflation would go down, right? You spend the American money the way you want, inflation goes up because God knows you're funding other wars, you're funding other countries, you're funding things that really doesn't matter to the American people. And these are the same things that we're facing now. They're funding wars in Ukraine. They're funding wars in Israel. They're funding wars in other countries. They're protecting other people's borders, right? Protecting other people's borders, but yet our border is wide open and the money is being spent and we're paying for it. $33 trillion in debt is what we are. So that's going to be it for this portion of the video. Thank you so much for watching the debates between Jimmy Carter and the great Ronald Reagan. So that was all about the economy and inflation and oil prices up and all of these things back then. And same thing now. Nothing's really changed except we have it's except years later, nothing's really changed. It's the same Democrat policies. You would think by this point they would learn, or they have learned, and they learn that the failures that they do is what they really want because they really do hate the country. They really do hate America. And so they know that these policies are failures because it's been tested and tried. And they know if we continue this course, we will definitely bring America down. And so this is what they go for. This is what they go for because they know that the kind of policies that they have is detrimental to this country. And they're all in for it. And that's why we need to take back the country, just like Ronald Reagan did back then. He took power, he took it away from them, and he ruled, and he did a great job. And as soon as he was gone, another one was in, and here we are again. They implemented the same rules, The same Carter rules, the same Clinton rules, the same Obama rules, the same Biden rules. Again, the rule is to destroy the country. And so, in the event, that's why we need people like Ronald Reagan. We need people like President Donald J. Trump. And we need people like Vivek Ramaswamy, maybe next cycle. We need these iron tough America First people to come in and clean up the mess and hope these people never get back in, because the second they get back in, it's the same policies that destroys the country. It's the same policies. And again, this is what they want. So friends, that's going to be it for this video. The Reagan Carter debates, and we'll take on the next subject sometime soon. So that'll come soon. So let me know in the comments if you enjoyed this, and if you'd like to see more historic videos like this. This way we could learn from our past and at least see what the Democrats were up to back then, and if it's the same old tricks they're up to in our time. So it's important to learn our past, to learn our history. And so let me know if y'all like this so I can continue to do that. Okay, so I will see you in the next video. Merry Christmas. God bless you. And you take care.